Hello again, this is another video recap of the web design course for the University of Guelph-Humber AHSS3080. What we're going to do today is take our Photoshop layout that we did and build HTML on it. So actually create it, start to create it in HTML. We're going to block out each separate content area, get the HTML down and some of the CSS to start the template and start the process to fill in the rest of the content in next week's class. By the end of this short little video today, we're going to have something that looks like this for different areas of content. Well, three really: a header piece, a content area, and a footer, just to get the basic measurements of everything down. And this is going to reflect the same sizes that we did in this previous assignment in Photoshop. You'll notice in Photoshop we have the header, we have the content area that will change among the 4 pages, and then we have the footer, which, just like the header, will remain consistent across the 4 pages. So eventually we'll get to the point of actually having some HTML, some working HTML in the browser, but for this video we're just going to block off these separate areas. So to start off, just like any normal HTML project, it's really important where the files are. So to keep the files in the same spot, I'm just going to create a new folder on the desktop called my last name website, F-A-I-L-L, or your last name, and all of my files are going to go in here. Today we're going to create 2 separate files, an HTML file and a CSS file. If you follow along in class, it's going to be the exact same as what we did in class. So to start out, I'm going to create a new HTML, and I'm going to save this right away in that folder that I just created. We know we're going to have an about page, so I'm going to title this about.html. Double check that it is in that folder. Again, it's really important where everything sits in the folder. And then the next thing I'll have to do is create a CSS file. File new CSS. And I'm going to save this one right away as well and call this website style. In my case, I'm using capital S in style. Make note of what you call this, because just like in the last assignment, it's really important the actual specific spelling of your file names. That's saved. You can see up here. I'm going to double check again that everything is in the same folder that we're working on. There we go. Okay, so now we can start coding. But before we do that, let's look at sort of where we're going. If we look at back to the Photoshop document, if we sort of start to describe this document and how things are laid out, we have 3 separate major areas: the footer at the bottom, the content area in the middle of the page, and then the header up at the top of the page. We know the exact dimensions of all of these from when we drew it in Photoshop, and we know that we want this to be centered in the page. So to start out, I'm just going to start working bottom up. I'm going to try to create this rectangle in HTML. I'm not going to worry too much about specific colors or specific visuals in this video. It's more just getting the content areas down and the right measurements down. So to do that, I'm going to add some content into the body. Remember, all HTML content has to be within the body. And I'm going to create a new div. And inside that, I'm going to write, this is the footer. So remember, this content will show up just like normal text, and this is the div that holds that text, the container that holds that text. If I preview this right now, all I'm going to see is this content, but let's see, there we go. We just have a little bit of HTML text in there. But what I want to do is a nice big rectangle in the center of the page. So to do that, I'm first going to have to set up a style. So if I move over to the CSS style sheet, the first style that I'm going to create, I'm going to call it footer. You can call your styles anything that you want, but it just makes sense to use plain English that describes what you're working on. I'm going to make a background color of gray just for the purpose of this video. We're going to change it later on and add some more style to it in next class, but this is mainly to be able to see that I actually have a content area that I'm working on. I also know from the Photoshop document that the height is 100 pixels. If for some reason you changed your height in Photoshop, you can also change it in this document too. If I save that, come back to the HTML document, it's always good to sort of think of, if I previewed this right now in the browser, what would it look like? In this case, right now, nothing would change because it doesn't recognize that the style we just created, the footer style that we just created, the HTML document doesn't even recognize that it's there yet. So before we go any further, let's connect these two files. Typing give me a second here. Oops, there we go. Link style sheet. Have to link it to the exact file that we created. The type is CSS, and the media in this case is going to be screen. Make sure to close off your quotation marks and your brackets, otherwise it'll break the code. So now that the files are connected, if we previewed it, it still wouldn't change anything because this div is not referencing the footer div that we just created. So just a simple adding the class called footer, and leave ourselves some comments just to make it easier to read later on. And then where it ends. So now if I preview this, if I've done everything properly, what I should expect is a gray background that's 100 pixels tall, and because we haven't really defined where in the page it's going to be, it should be sort of rammed up in the left top corner of the browser. And that's exactly what we should have happen. So everything goes all the way across. Not really what we want, and it's at the top of the page. The footer should be at the bottom of the page, so to look back to our Photoshop document, this is that sort of rectangle that we're working on right now, but in the browser it's rammed up in the left corner and fills up the entire page. So what I can do is I can define the width at 960 pixels, which we know from our Photoshop document previously, and we know how to center a div from the resume assignment that we did using margins. We're going to set the margin left and the margin right to auto, and what that does is it says we know the exact width is 960 pixels, so everything on the left and right, make them fill them to the same size. So this will center, it should center the document if we've done it properly. And there we go, we've changed the size of the div and centered it in the page. If we move forward to the next pieces that we're going to do in this layout, we have the major content area. Above that we have the title within the header, and then we have the sort of menu item within the header. So just looking at the header, I'm going to turn these two areas off. The header is made up of two pieces. One is at the very top, the navigation bar, and then below that we created a title header that has the title of the different pages that we're going to create. So next up, let's start working on this header in HTML. So when you're writing CSS, it doesn't really matter the order of it, but just to keep your own sanity, it's easier to write it top to bottom. So elements that are going to be at the top of the page, it's easier to read if they're at the top of this document, but it really doesn't matter too much. In HTML it does matter, so anything that you want to be displayed above this footer, for example, the actual text, the content will have to be above the footer. So to keep it consistent, why don't we make a new style called header. And we also know that later on we're going to change the background color, but to make it easier to see right now, I'm just going to put it at a, why don't we say some kind of crazy color, and I just have this written down. And we know the height from our Photoshop document is 75 pixels. We know our width is 960 pixels, and we know we can center it using margin left and margin right. Back to the HTML document, we need to create a new div for that. So div class, we're just going to use the style that we just created called header. And you might be able to hear my dog in the background snoring. And I'm going to close this off, say end of header, and then inside the header, just to give us some actual content to show. So if we've done this properly, we should have a header showing up above the footer in this color that we defined. The width and the height is defined, and it's centered in the page. So if we preview this, I'm just going to refresh this. There we go. So it's working great. Next up, we'll realize that we're starting to replicate a lot of code here. So anytime you see the exact same thing being duplicated over and over again, so the width, the margins are being typed in the footer and the header, it might be an opportunity to see how we can make this code a little bit smarter. If we look back to the Photoshop document, turn all these layers back on, everything shares those specific styles. Everything, all these different areas are 960 pixels wide, and they're centered within the document. So it might be an opportunity to create sort of an overall larger content area, overall larger bucket that holds everything together. So what we're going to do next is create another giant div that wraps everything around and holds these two pieces, just like we did in the resume. I'm going to call this container, and really what I want to do is take the width and the margins and use that specifically. First off, I'm going to delete this code that we just put in the header and the footer, and I'm just going to put the width in for now, just so we can see how things progress. If I go back to the HTML document to preview it, just to see the changes we've made, we took away the centering and the overall width. Everything should move to the left and fill the whole screen, but we want to use the container to hold all that together. To do that, we can we can wrap these two in the new div that we just created. This is called nesting divs. You're putting a div inside another div. To do that, just like we did before, div class equals container and it's going to encompass all of this. I'm going to tab this over just by highlighting it and pressing tab, make it easier to read, and then close the div down here. So if we start to read this the way the computer is going to read it, everything within the body tag. So the body tag opens, then this div class container opens. So now we have the container open, then header opens up, then there's information inside the header, then the header finishes, then the footer opens up, still inside the container, information inside the footer, footer closes, and then the container closes. So if we preview this, the only real change we should see is right now everything goes the full width of the screen, but because the header and the footer are now inside the container, and the container is 960 pixels wide, this should stop at 960 pixels. If I refresh that, there we go. That's exactly what we were expecting. It's not centered yet because we haven't added that code into the CSS. But I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to center the container once rather than centering the header, footer, content areas multiple times. If I preview this again, it should center it, and there we go. I'm going to continue moving along with this and create the other content areas. So this middle area as well as the title. So after the header we have a title. We don't have to define the width, because we've already done that in the overall container. We do have to define the height, and we can get that from the Photoshop document that we did before. Oops. And 30 pixels. And for now, I'm going to give it a background color. It doesn't really matter what the color is, we're going to change these colors later, but just something that's a little bit easier to read. And then I'm going to create that title area in HTML. Space this out a little bit so it's easier to see everything. Now to figure out exactly where am I going to put that title area. Go back to Photoshop. The title area is going to come after this header navigation bar that we just did, but before the footer. So in HTML, it's going to come after the header, so after the header's finished closing, but before the footer starts, before the footer opens. So it'd have to go right in here. A comment to keep track. And then close that div. So go through it again. Container opens, header opens and closes, title opens and closes, footer opens and closes, and then container closes. Save that, take a look. It should show up in between these two pieces. And the height showed, the content showed, but there's something going on with the color of it. let's just make sure that I didn't pick an odd color, background color. I'm going to just pick some blue color here. There we go. Okay, so I don't know what the issue was. I think I just typed in the color improperly. So if we keep referring back to the Photoshop document, you'll notice that in my HTML right now, the header and the title, they are right up against each other, but in Photoshop I have a gap there as well as at the top of the page. We can control that by using margins and padding. Margins, think of margins as space on the outside of a div, and think of padding as space on the inside of a div. So what I want to use a margin on the outside of the header div at the top and the bottom to make that space. So find the header div. I'm going to put a margin to the bottom of 15 pixels. And again, we're getting this number from the Photoshop document. And if I preview that, I should get a space right there. And there we go. Also want to put a little bit more space along the top. So I'm going to put a margin top of 10 pixels. And then you can see that little bit came down, which is what I wanted. Next up, we have to create this middle area, this middle content area. And I'm going to call that content. I'm going to put it after the title. I don't have to define the width because it's going to be inside of that overall container, but I do want to define the height, in this case of 400 pixels, and the background color, why don't I make it sort of an orange color for now. Now create that in the HTML after the title but before the footer starts. Content. Spelling might help. End of content, leave myself a little note. And if I preview this, I should see a large content area below the title but above the footer. There we go. So things are starting to move along. We have the different areas blocked out, the different sizes and the right spaces on the page. Still a little way to go to get the visuals the same, but at least we have sort of the rough sizes. Next up, the last thing I'm going to do today is just put this little put this little text piece in the bottom. Anytime that you want to add a specific visual piece to code, it always helps to describe it, what it looks like, and then try to make that code happen. So it sounds a little bit trivial, but if we look at this, we can describe it by saying, I'm just going to zoom in, we can describe it by saying it's text, it's white, it's centered in the page, it's a specific size, specific font face, and then we can remember those different things that we described about it and make that happen in code. So we are going to create a new div, and we can call that div copyright because it's, we'll say some copyright information. And the only thing I'm going to do to start is change the color of that. So to change the color of text, you can just use the element color, and I'm going to change it to white in this case. now in the HTML, I'm actually going to put it in a little bit of a different space. So up until now, we've created divs on their own. So we had a div here, 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 and here, and all of them were nested inside this larger container. But now we're going to start adding divs inside another div. So this is actually going to go inside the footer, and we're going to reference it copyright, because we just called that one copyright, and say start of copyright, and here I'm going to put my name and the year, and then close this div off. And if I've done it properly, what I should see when I refresh this, this text will still be there, but there will also be another piece of text that is my name and changed to the color white. And there we go. So the other styles that we wanted to add to it, oops, if I go back to Photoshop, we wanted it to be centered and maybe change the font of it. So we can do both of those things inside CSS. We can center it just like we centered the overall div. And to actually be able to center it, we need to define a width. So in this case, I'm just going to put it at 100 pixels. You can make that larger or smaller depending on how much text you have in it, but you can't center something if it doesn't have a width. Oops. Refresh that, and it is centered, but you'll see it's dropped to 2 lines now, because in my case, it's not quite wide enough. So if I bump this up to 150 pixels, let's say, now it's centered. Change the color. All we have to do now is change the font, and we can do that by saying font face. We'll go Verdana for now. Remember the issues with web-safe fonts. And if we refresh this, there we go. Font color has changed, the font face has changed, it's in the center of the page, or in the center of this div, and now we have all of the different content areas blocked out. If you've gotten this far and things are going well, I would encourage you to start to explore a little bit more. See if you can start to add the menu items in the same way. You can call this navigation, that would be a good div for it, and this div up here, a good name for that would be logo. I will see you in class, and ask any questions that you have in the comments below.